members of Parliament, support staff, visitors in the public tribune, radio listeners, TV viewers, all viewing this meeting via social media, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the continuation of public meeting number 7 for today, Thursday, April the 3rd. At this time, I want to give a special word of welcome to the Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, Mrs. Melissa Gums, and her support staff here present. We have established a quorum of 8 members. I invite you to stand for a moment of reflective silence. Thank you. I have received notice of absence of the member Lewis and notice of lateness from the member Doran. Are there any other notifications from the floor at this time? That does not appear to be necessary right now, so we can continue with the agenda point for this public meeting, and that is the draft national ordinance laying down rules on higher education and research, the so-called Higher Education Ordinance. This is listed at Parliament on the document number 431 of the parliamentary year 22-23, and it is dated the 8th of February of 2023. The draft national ordinance itself is numbered 165 of the same parliamentary year. I think it's important to note that this meeting was initially scheduled for November 8, 2024, but was postponed upon the request of the then acting Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport. The meeting was then convened on February 17th of this year, during which agenda points 1 and 2 were closed, and agenda point 3 was adjourned upon request from the minister to postpone the handling of this particular draft national ordinance. The meeting handling this draft national ordinance on higher education commenced on March 13th of this year. Before we go over to the agenda point, as this is a public meeting of Parliament, allow me to remind the members of Parliament of the usage of interruptions during public meetings. And just briefly, it's the chairperson who permits interruptions, and these interruptions should solely aim to seek clarification, challenge assertions, or contribute additional information. And these should always be brief. So going over to the agenda point number 3, as I mentioned, we received this draft on February 8, 2023, and of course all members have received that draft as well. We had central committee meetings on August 14th and October 26th of 2023 on this particular matter, and members of Parliament posed their questions, and these were answered by the minister. As is required for any national ordinance, a report has been made on the deliberations in the Central Committee and sent to Parliament. The government answered this report with a so-called note following the final report, and this document is IS 265 of the parliamentary year 23-24. The draft national ordinance was subsequently tabled in a public meeting on September the 5th, 2024. Members of Parliament, of course, posed questions, and due to the fact that the composition of Parliament changed on September the 20th, it was decided to restart the handling of this draft. Hence, this meeting was initially called for November the 8th of last year. On March 13th, the meeting commenced with the handling of agenda point 3, the draft higher education ordinance, and the minister at that time provided a presentation on the draft. Members of Parliament were allowed to ask questions on the draft and the presentation, and the meeting was then adjourned to give the minister time to respond to the questions. It is also important to note that on September the 19th of last year, we here at Parliament received a nota van wijziging, a so-called memorandum of modification from the government on this draft, registered under IS 049 of the parliamentary year 24-25. All of these documents are available to members of Parliament via the Parliament General Team. So at this time, but before I give the floor to the Honorable Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, I do wish to add a notification of lateness that we received, and that was for the member, the MP, Veronica Jansen-Webster. So having added that to the notifications of lateness, I now invite the Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, Ms. Melissa Gums, to answer the questions posed by members of Parliament in the first round. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and good morning to you, the revered the members of Parliament, those joining us in the Tribune and those joining us online. I'm joined today by my Policy Advisor in Cabinet, Ms. Erin Ellis, and the Department Head of Education, Mrs. Sidonia Lacobinier-Hodge. I'll dive right into answering the questions, Madam Chair Lady, starting off with questions from MP Veronica Jansen-Webster. Regarding accreditation, does the Minister have a list of accreditation institutions already? The Department of Education conducted research in collaboration with USM and AUC towards an accreditation framework, where several models of accreditation were considered, including government-controlled accreditation, private accrediting bodies, a hybrid approach, and self-regulation. The pros and cons of each model were considered, and based on the research outcome, the hybrid approach was chosen, allowing for government oversight through independent accreditation bodies. The Ministry will play a key role in defining criteria for the recognition of these accreditation bodies, ensuring that they possess the necessary expertise, adhere to recognized quality assurance standards, and maintain transparency. Independent accreditation agencies will be rigorously evaluated based on standards such as governance, adequate resources, and continuous quality assurance processes, aligning with international benchmarks. The Ministry will ensure these agencies meet specified standards by setting clear evaluation criteria. These include well-defined governance, transparency in reporting, collaboration with stakeholders, equitable decision-making, and adherence to international standards. Agencies must also undergo regular self-evaluations and external reviews to ensure their processes and outcomes align with global accreditation standards. There is a preliminary list of agencies that were recommended during the research. However, the process of establishing the list of accreditation bodies in a national decree is ongoing and will be concluded after the Higher Education Ordinance is established. Question 2 from MP Jansen-Webster. Does the Minister have accreditation with the Dominican Republic or other Latin countries? Will they also be accredited? The accreditation framework does not specifically list an accreditation agency within the Dominican Republic. However, it does provide guidelines to evaluate such institutions to ensure that they meet the minimum standards to assess the quality of higher education programs in St. Martin. Moving on to questions from MP Lyndon Lewis. Why was the academic year changed to September 1st to August 31st? The Department of Education consulted verbally with USM to confirm the start and end of the academic year prior to finalizing the Nota van Wijziging, and it was understood that the institution's academic year was from September 1st to August 31st. However, that appeared to be a misunderstanding. Given that USM has since indicated a preference for August 1st to July 31st, and it is customary for some institutions to begin in either August or September, it is recommended that the law make mention of both to allow for adjustments in practice as may be necessary. The definition of the academic year was added to the draft ordinance for transparency, since there is a need for a clear distinction between the academic year and the financial calendar year. Question 2. Were discussions held on the proposed changes before placed in the draft, or was it a decision made and mandated? Following the deliberations between the Ministry of ECYS and Parliament, the Department of Education and the SG of ECYS engaged in consultations with USM regarding points of concern, which USM tabled to Parliament regarding the draft law. USM also met with the then Minister of ECYS at the time. A Nota van Wijziging was drafted considering concerns of USM, and the Nota was approved by the COM and presented to Parliament on September 18, 2025. A proposal for a second Nota van Wijziging was not approved as it was deemed not necessary. The proposed changes related to the following 3 points. 1, including the names of AUC and USM in the draft law. 2, changing financial reporting to the calendar year instead of academic year. And 3, adding in consultation with the institution to the text related to establishing the height of tuition fees for funded institutions. As indicated during my last visit to Parliament, the names of AUC and USM are not included in the draft ordinance as the government has chosen to regulate higher education on a whole and not any single institution for the sake of fairness, legal flexibility, and considering international best practices. AUC and USM are, however, named in the current draft Memorial van Toelichting. In addition, the financial reporting by the calendar year was not approved because annual and financial reporting are to be done by academic year in accordance with the manner in which funding is being made available. Lastly, the consultation process is a critical part of the process of establishing any legislation and regulation, and therefore stating in consultation with the institution is redundant and was deemed not necessary. The Ministry and USM have been engaged in consultations regarding these matters throughout the legislative process and extensively on a number of occasions since the draft ordinance has been presented to Parliament. I firmly believe, as Minister of ECYS, that this draft ordinance currently before Parliament sufficiently addresses the 3 points of concern mentioned above and allows for the further positive development of higher education on St. Martin. Question 3. Once approved, what is the transition period to allow existing institutions to adhere to the requirements? Has it been specifically stipulated? The Higher Education Ordinance includes provisions for a transition period to allow existing institutions to adapt. Specifically, institutions already offering higher education programs at the time of enactment will have time to apply for ministerial recognition. They must submit their application for recognition within 6 weeks of the law coming into effect. Until the minister evaluates and decides on these applications, institutions can continue issuing diplomas, titles, and degrees. However, I want to make it clear that this minister will evaluate and decide within a reasonable timeline once applications have been received. Question 4. Was impact considered and discussed? The impact of these changes was carefully considered and shaped through stakeholder engagement before the law itself was finalized. Moving on to questions from MP Ludmila de Wever. Why are AUC and USM not listed? As mentioned, AUC and USM are named in the current draft Memorial van Toelichting. For the sake of fairness, legal flexibility, and considering international best practices, they were not named in the draft ordinance. And I would also like to point to the example of Curacao, where the university was listed in the ordinance, and then later on it was removed to allow for that legal flexibility that I speak of. Question 2. What is the role of NEPA here in this legislation? The National Institute for Professional Advancement, NEPA, operates within the framework of the National Ordinance on Secondary Vocational Education and Training, offering courses equivalent to international standard classification of education levels 3 and 4, which are distinct from higher education, which encompasses international standard classification of education levels 5 to 8. Therefore, there is no role for NEPA in this particular legislation. Moving on to questions from MP Doran. What are the thoughts of the ministry on enhancing the level of the NEPA in regard to this law? What are we doing to bring NEPA to this level? As I mentioned in my presentation, Madam Chair Lady, NEPA is an autonomous foundation that provides advanced vocational education, with its program regulations outlined in the National Ordinance on Secondary Vocational Education and Training, Secundair Beroepsonderwijs, SBO. The statutes of NEPA also designates it as an SBO institution. If the NEPA would in the future like to transition into a higher education institution, it must align its regulatory standards and operations with the requirements established in the draft Higher Education Ordinance. Moving on to questions from MP La Cruz. NEPA and SMMC are giving a nursing course. SMMC nurses cannot study at NEPA. Can the minister look into this? I'd like to state, Madam Chair Lady, through you to the MP, I've personally heard a variety of concerns expressed by participants of this course and can state that the ministry itself was not aware of these and is looking into the matter. I am happy to provide further information to the MP and subsequently to Parliament in writing once we have ascertained what the issues are and identified a way forward. Moving on to questions from MP Artwell Arian. What measures are included to support technological advancements in education now and in the future? Currently, the draft Higher Education Ordinance allows institutions to offer digital and remote education, facilitating hybrid learning models and international collaborations to enhance technological integration in higher education. Additionally, data-driven quality assurance is mandated, requiring institutions to use self-assessments and analytics to improve educational standards. For the future, policies encourage the expansion of fully online degree programs and AI-driven personalized learning to enhance accessibility and innovation. Furthermore, big data and predictive analytics are expected to play a larger role in accreditation and student performance monitoring, while international partnerships will continue to support technological adoption and research collaboration. Additionally, as I've mentioned previously, I'm happy to state again that the ministry is in the early stages of establishing an AI in education policy that will provide guidance for educators, students, and parents alike. Question 2. How will the government contribute to the institutions? What financial requirements must institutions meet? Higher education institutions that meet the eligibility requirements detailed in the draft ordinance will qualify for funding. The higher education institutions that qualify for funding will be funded in accordance with regulations established in Articles 93 to 101 of the draft ordinance. Articles 93 to 101 specify the conditions under which funding can be allocated, including accreditation status, the quality of education, and the overall financial management of institutions. The ministry can suspend or withdraw funding if institutions fail to meet necessary standards or misuse the funds. Institutions must submit annual financial reports, undergo audits, and maintain transparency in their operations. Additionally, the ministry is empowered to carry out investigations into the legitimacy of funding usage and can impose penalties if institutions are found to be in violation of the regulations. The articles also outline the process of discontinuing funding, including circumstances like failure to regain accreditation or the improper allocation of resources. Funded institutions must also submit yearly financial and operational reports to the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport, including a financial statement verified by a certified accountant. The draft ordinance makes it possible for further provisions to be detailed in a national decree, which the ministry is currently working on. The overall goal is to ensure that funding supports high-quality educational outcomes and is used efficiently and in accordance with the law. I would like to also make the following clear, Madam Chair Lady, to the general public and the members of Parliament, that current higher education institutions are not state-owned institutions. Therefore, there's also a responsibility to find supplemental funding on their own as well. Question 3. What are the conditions to public funding and how will compliance be monitored? Higher education institutions seeking public funding must meet specific conditions, including accreditation compliance, so institutions must obtain accreditation from a recognized accreditation body to ensure quality standards, annual reporting, so institutions must submit yearly financial and operational reports to MECIS, including a financial statement verified by a certified accountant. In addition, every 4 years, institutions must submit a plan for the further development of the institution outlining policies on education quality, faculty development, and institutional investments. Compliance monitoring will include the following. The Inspectorate of Education will conduct regular evaluations to ensure compliance with accreditation and operational requirements. 2. The Minister of Education reviews institutions' financial accountability and may suspend or adjust funding based on compliance. And finally, institutions that fail to meet conditions risk withdrawal of accreditation and public funding. Question 4. How will institutions be penalized if they do not meet the accreditation or quality of standards of the legislation? If a higher education institution fails to meet the required accreditation or quality standards, the following penalties apply. 1. Loss of accreditation and degree granting authority. If an institution does not renew its accreditation after 6 years, it loses the right to issue accredited diplomas, titles, and degrees. The institution must report this immediately to the Inspectorate of Education. 2. A temporary recovery period. If an accreditation renewal is denied, the institution has 2 years to regain accreditation while still being able to issue degrees. 3. Student protection measures. If accreditation is permanently lost, students must be offered the opportunity to complete their studies at another accredited institution. And finally, financial and administrative sanctions. So the Ministry of Education may suspend or withdraw public funding for non-compliant institutions. Institutions that commit fraud in accreditation processes may face legal and financial penalties. Question 5. What is the timeline for the implementation of the law and how will it be enforced to ensure compliance? The Ministry is in the process of concluding a roadmap for implementation and drafting national decrees to establish accreditation and funding regulations with the ambition of the law coming into force by the 2026-2027 academic year. As indicated earlier, compliance will be enforced through the following means. The Inspector of Education will conduct regular evaluations to ensure compliance with accreditation and operational requirements. The Minister of ECYS reviews institutions' financial accountability and may suspend or adjust funding based on compliance. And institutions that fail to meet conditions risk withdrawal of accreditation and or public funding. Moving on to questions from MP Kotai. Accreditation bodies, will this include NVAO, who are used by Curacao and Aruba? Will this be acceptable here as well? The NVIO only accredits institutions in the Netherlands and Flanders. Institutions in the Dutch Caribbean may only receive recognition from the NVIO. We must understand the difference between the two. So accreditation ensures that institutions and courses meet rigorous quality standards, fostering international credibility, student mobility, and employer confidence in graduates. Recognition, on the other hand, is a statement from the NVIO that the quality of the educational program meets NVIO quality standards. Prioritizing accreditation is essential for strengthening our higher education sector and ensuring long-term academic and professional opportunities for students. Therefore, the focus of the accreditation framework was on establishing a preliminary list of accreditation agencies and a proposed framework for accreditation. So through you, Madam Chair Lady, to the MP, no, the NVIO is not included amongst the list of accreditation bodies identified in the framework because it can only provide our higher education programs with recognition. As I mentioned previously, however, the process of establishing this preliminary list in a national decree is ongoing and will be concluded after the law for higher education is established. And that brings me to the end of the answers for the questions posed in round 1, and I look forward to anything in round 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of ECYS. Members of Parliament, before going over to the second round of questioning, of course, you have the opportunity now, if there's any need for clarification questions on what the Minister has presented. Is there any need for clarifications? That does not appear to be the case. So we could actually now go over to the second round of speakers, and that takes place in accordance with the speakers list. And I will just await a few minutes as our first speaker is MP Veronica Janssen, who would be given the floor in a moment. MP Janssen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning and welcome to the Minister and support staff. Good morning to people here in the audience listening from you. I see people from USM and also our viewers at home. I took note of the answers given by the Minister regarding my questions on accreditation. And in particular, I took note of the answer given for accreditation for Latin American accreditation. I have since had contact with another Latin American school, and therefore, again, for me, it's very important to know that if there are other possibilities for higher education, because I think education is very, very important for St. Martin, and the accessibility of education and the choices that our students would have. I think that it is of paramount importance, and that's why I asked those questions. But for now, because that was my main concern about accreditation and about the possibilities for other schools to enter the market, I have no further questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Janssen Webster. The next MP, according to the speakers list, would be MP Lewis, who is currently not present. And I continue again in accordance with the speakers list, and I give the floor to MP Ludmila de Wever. MP de Wever, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and thank you, well, good morning to everyone, and thank you to the Minister for clearly explaining all of our questions, actually, because she actually brought it back and made it really easy to understand in the sense of how long this has been going on and how complicated it is, because sometimes we think about the education, you see the sort of participation is reflective is a reflection on our understanding of the entire legislation that we're dealing with, actually. I have just one that I did not ask in the first round, which is related to the way that we calculate the coverage that we do give, because when we're in our preparation for this meeting, obviously we're all dealing with the same stakeholders in terms of trying to get an understanding of the concerns of our existing institutions and making sure that, let's say, the viability or the continuation of those institutions will happen while respecting the fact that they are indeed semi-private or based on a private endowment. So it's just to get an overall understanding. Then this is the discussion that we were having in terms of why the same level of consideration for the calculation of coverage and support is basically the same thing for the lagere schools, the secondary education, as it is now with the higher education. So just to explain, please, why it's the same thing being held, or if that's something that came under review to be considered where it's not based on the number of students, but it's based on maybe operational costs. Just to further clarify that. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Ludmila de Wever. We continue with the list. The next speaker up would have been MP Duran, for whom we have received a notice of lateness. We continue with MP, what would have been MP Roseberg, time to speak. And we have a notice of absence from MP Roseberg for today's meeting. And then the next speaker up would be MP La Cruz, whom I invite to take the floor. MP La Cruz.
A blessed morning, Madam Chair, Lady Griffier, Honorable Minister of Education, those in the Tribune, and my fellow colleagues. Madam Chair, Lady, anxiously awaiting the response from the question asked by MP De Wever, as I just went through it myself. And, you know, how it started is important for me. From in the Netherlands, I already realized that the subsidy for the school would be based on how much students graduate. That's what I understood when I was there. I see now in the law here it is somewhat different. So I'd like to know how that came about and where it is today and where we're going after. Because I do agree with MP De Wever. If a school has 20 students, it still needs the same amount of teachers, educators to cover all the classes. So the operation cost doesn't make much of a difference when it comes to the operation cost of the school. Thank you, Madam Chair, Lady.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. According to the list, we would have had MP Irian. He is not here presently. I continue, and we have MP Wever on the speakers list. MP Wever, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to Griffier, to Honorable Minister, support staff, my honorable colleagues, those that are listening and viewing via whichever media, and those that are here in the Tribune with us this morning. I don't have any further questions. I just want to commend the Minister for her explanations and the answering of the questions in the first round. So I'll wait the answers from my colleagues, and then we go forward from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Wever. Again, according to our speakers list, in the first round, the next member up would be MP Kotai. MP Kotai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to all. Thank you to the Minister for answering our questions. I as well, Madam Chair, don't have any follow-up questions. I appreciate the clear-cut answers from our Minister, and I would look forward for the rest. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Kotai, and still in accordance with the list, the next speaker up would be MP Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also geen behoefte. I also commend the Minister, and I await the vote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Peterson. And then still going according to our list, we have MP Labega up. MP Labega, you have the floor.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning to the Griffier. Good morning to my fellow colleagues, everybody home listening in the viewing public. Good morning to the Minister of ECYS and her support staff. I don't have any further questions. Everything was answered adequately, and I await the rest of your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Labega. And the last MP to speak according to this speaker's list is MP Otley. MP Otley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day to the viewing and listening public. The Honorable Minister of ECYS. I have no further remarks.
Thank you, MP Otley. Minister, I have heard one or two questions that came from the members of Parliament. Most members have indicated no need for further questions, but I would ask you if you want to address the questions as posed right away, or you need some time to...
Sorry, Madam Chair, if I may, it was one question that we kind of perceived from MP De Wever, so it's just the one question.
And there was sort of, and MP La Cruz indicated he too is awaiting that answer.
Okay.
So,
We would require a half hour to get the answer to the question, if that's possible.
okay, so then I would want to suggest that we start at 11:30. That will give you a little more than a half an hour. So
I appreciate Parliament's indulgence.
this meeting is adjourned until 11:30 a.m. Meeting adjourned. Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, we are now resuming this public meeting of Parliament, which we had briefly adjourned for approximately 30 minutes in order for the minister to just respond to some brief questions asked by members of Parliament in the second round. The minister is now ready to answer that particular question or two. And so I invite the minister to take the floor as she responds to matters raised by members of Parliament in the second round. Minister Gums, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. And thank you to the members of Parliament for the remarks and questions received in round two. Before I go into answering the questions that were actually asked, I just wanted to touch a bit on the comments made by MP Veronica Jansen-Webster regarding Latin America, and are there other possibilities for other institutions to enter the market and such. Yes, there are. So the accreditation framework does not specifically list an accreditation agency within Latin America. However, the framework will provide flexibility in terms of the choice of accreditation agencies by providing guidelines to evaluate such institutions to ensure that they meet the minimum standards to assess the quality of higher education programs in St. Martin. So just as a note to that point from the MP. And moving on to the question from MP Ludmila de Wever. Regarding calculating the coverage, why the same level of consideration for the calculation and support in VO/FO and higher education? So is it based on number of students or operational cost? So the mechanism applied to the formula funding includes three key components with a focus on financial sustainability. These components include, one, the fixed costs of the institution being accounted for based on historic costs. Two, the variable costs of the institution are taken into account along with the number of students enrolled. And three, a component based on contract funding that allows for growth based on innovative activities, institutional goals, national priorities, including the possibility for private and public partnerships based on contract funding. The three components together appeal to a mechanism that allows for institutional sustainability, which I believe should be the goal for any institution. The ministry seeks to ensure that the institutions can appeal to all three components and ensure growth of their establishments. The latter component, contract funding, does require for adequate strategic planning, cooperation, and substantiation between the ministry and the institutions in question. And MP La Cruz also asked about the subsidy based on students, how did this come about, where is it today, and where are we going after. So the ministry developed the higher education funding model, which has enabled annual funding of USM as of 2020-2021 to be geared towards the sustainable funding of the institution through the funding of personnel and operation costs, taking into account the actual cost of USM. The funding model for higher education is distinctly different from the funding provided via the National Decree for the Funding of Education, which is used to fund primary, secondary, and advanced vocational education. Although the number of students in accredited programs will be a component of the manner in which funding is calculated, the actual personnel and operational costs of the institution is the most significant component of the funding calculation. As indicated in the response to MP de Wever, the funding model for higher education is based on a three-pillar system, by which Pillar 1 and 2 are geared at covering the fixed and variable costs of the institution. The objective of this type of lump sum funding is to ensure the financial sustainability of the funded higher education institution and to fund it in such a way that tuition or other costs do not become a barrier to access for citizens. In addition to the lump sum funding, Pillar 3 allows for contract funding, which enables the government to have a means of funding that allows for further investment towards growth, program development, research and development, and public-private partnerships. That brings me to the end of my questions received in round two, Madam Chair Lady, and if I may, just as closing remarks to you, the members of Parliament and the general public, this law has been some time coming. In fact, it is a law that should have been considered and established before the existence of even AUC and USM, because to handle such things after the establishment of an institution, private or public, is kind of putting the cart before the horse. Of course, I was not alive when these institutions came into being. But in reflecting on the past, we can identify the way forward, and that is what the ministry is now aiming to do. And the way forward will be uncomfortable at times because there are some difficult decisions and tough realities to face when it comes to the realm of education. However, that is the nature of evolution, and it's my sincerest hope that the accessibility and level of higher education will improve for St. Martin once this law, hopefully, once this law is adopted. Additionally, it's my intention to continue to ensure that institutions can become self-sustainable. It is my general experience during my time in the United States that those entities that do not incorporate alternative avenues of funding and development into their business model do not survive the harsh landscape of education. And I don't want to see any locally based institution, state-owned or otherwise, suffer such a fate. The regulation of financing is one part of it. The quality of education being administered is another. And that must now be the focus moving forward. I want to thank the Department of Education, the Ministry of ECYS for its tireless work on this national ordinance and all stakeholders who consulted and participated in this process. And I look forward as well to communicating the establishment of the accreditation framework to Parliament once it is completed. Thank you.
Minister Gums, I want to thank you very much for your answer to the recent questions posed, as well as to your concluding remarks on the draft law higher education. I will still, if it's necessary, members, if any member needs a clarification, the opportunity is now. And I don't see that being the case. So we have come to the end of the deliberations. And according to Article 57 of the Rules of Order, we now go over to the voting on the draft national ordinance containing rules on higher education and research, the higher education law, or ordinance rather. And this is our draft national ordinance number 165 of the parliamentary year 2022-2023. So we will vote on Articles 1 through 135. The intitulé, the title, the considerants, consideration, the draft in its entirety, including the memorandum of modification as registered on the IS number 049 of the year 24-25. Does any member require or request voting by roll call? Hoofdelijke stemming. Silence in the place, that means that no one is requesting. And that being the case, without hoofdelijke stemming, the draft law is accepted unanimously. Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, a minister and support staff, according to Article 88, subsection 1 of the Constitution of St. Martin, Parliament shall now notify the government that Parliament has approved this draft in its public meeting of today, Thursday, April the 3rd, 2025. At this time, I want to thank the members of Parliament. You are part of what I consider a historic decision, considering also what the minister said earlier about how long a draft national ordinance on higher education has been pending. So congratulations to the minister and her ministry. And again, I wish to express our thanks to the Minister of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport and all here today, as well as in the background, for providing the necessary information. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, we have come to the end of this public meeting. Again, I thank you all for your participation and hereby close this meeting of Parliament. Meeting closed.